Alright guys, it is Sunday recap. It's a day or a night where I'd like to just come on, talk about some of the trades I did this week and talk about some of the trades I'm looking for. I want to apologize, I didn't come live stream on Thursday or Friday. I got really sick, long story, but went to a very moldy house that was vacated because the owners had deceased, and I think I got sick because of all the mold and mildew that was left over in that house, and I didn't wear a mask, which I should have. So gonna save the details from that, but basically didn't get a chance to come on. Still traded though, just wasn't 100% myself to be able to come on and give you guys some of the moves. So let's just go over some of the trades I did this week and some of the ideas that I have. First off, we'll start off with our favorite Tesla. Going into Friday, I did look for a long. It's not a stock I trade every day. We mentioned about the negative momentum. The 490 was impossible to break, so we did a massive sell-off. And so, you know, I always mention to you guys I have my levels, and so I had some levels carved out. Thought I was, you know, gonna do pretty well on Friday, and I'd do a long at opening. And one thing I realized is I'm just not that great at swinging, or sorry, opening on Tesla when the market opens. It's not a trade I typically do well on. I called the bottom about a year ago when I mentioned the 215 to 220 was a buy zone, and I've made, you know, a ton of money in call options and a swing type of trade ideas. But when it comes to day trading it, it's just not something I would do within the first 15 minutes. And so I still day trade it. I can day trade it well, but not in the opening 5 minute without the opening 5 minute candle or an opening range, just because the amount it moves. You know, if we look at the first 15 minutes here, we're looking at a, you know, a low of 430 and a high of 436. So you have a $6 range, and I had a level carved out. I believe my entry here was at 433 or 432.85, somewhere in there, and I got essentially stopped out. And then, you know, just the emotions of the trade came in, and I was like, okay, well, this looks like a short. And so if you look at Tesla, typically when it sells off, right here, typically, you know, I've watching this stock for many years, and so typically when it sells off, here's my minute candle. You know, typically it'll consolidate on a lower candle, and then it'll continue to drop. In this case, it actually tested VWAP. So this right here is not a normal behavior for Tesla. So this purple line is the VWAP, volume weighted average price. And so typically if it's going to test it this early in the trade, which in, you know, the first 5-10 minutes, probably means it's going to break through, and that's what it did. So it consolidated around VWAP, trapped a bunch of shorts. You might have thought it was going to fail. Typically it'll consolidate lower, and then it'll continue to fail for people waiting for that break. And so I ended up shorting it, and then clearly I was wrong, got stopped out that way. Then I joined the trend and joined it up to here and got out around 439. And so once I got stopped out here, recognized that it was supposed to, you know, it was a long, right? So you see this right here, this consolidation was around the 435, get stopped out, retest, reclaim, and then run. And I think this thing ran all the way up to, yeah, up into the 444. So it was actually a pretty good long trade for the day. Overall, on the daily, you can actually see it's doing pretty good. It's actually doing a nice curl rebound. And so, you know, we have this gap here on the daily. And so I expect, you know, the stock sort of found its bottom here at 428. And so there's definitely a swing long in this trade. We've done a lot of selling off. We've lost, you know, almost 20%, almost 20%, about maybe more about 15%. From just where we were a couple weeks ago. So it's massive sell-off. Our momentum is still negative. It is slowing down, and that is represented by the curl. So it's definitely to keep an eye on, but I wouldn't be as short bias as I was previously. And now that we looked at a bounce, like I said, I would look at buying anything over 436 and swinging into this long. Okay, so there's an option here, probably trade sideways. I can see that happening for a while here, and then we can break out into this 500 range. Okay, so good trade on the long. I think the shorts are kind of taking a break here, and so that's what I see here. You know, near term, maybe back into the test of the 20-day. AppLovin, mentioned to you guys a couple weeks ago, probably the biggest trade of the year. On this flush candle here, same thing. It kind of bottomed here at the 600 level, and it sort of rebounded. You can get, you know, all these trades every day. This is, you know, 39. If you look at the ATR, right, it's 33 points. And so if you're on the right side of the trade, not necessarily at the bottom, you could easily get 20, 25 points a day on this trade if you know, depending on how much you hold. And like I said, I long term believe this is going to be $1,000 stock. I don't swing trade a lot, but this would be a stock that I firmly believe, given all of all the price to earnings ratio, all the hype about it, and just how much it's run. Just reminds me really like an Nvidia, and an SMCI. I see this thing running to $1,000. I don't see why it would take a shortcut and come back to earth, which was, near $100. I see this thing just constantly running and bouncing off this 200 day. And so again, I'm not a long-term trader on this stock, but it really, if I were to look at any options now that this flush candle has been there, I would be looking at a 700 break here once the sell-off happens for us to get back up here and break through and to continue the march to 1,000. So that's where I would be looking at. I would not be looking to short the stock anymore, especially as we start to curl like we are in Tesla. MU, again, same call a few weeks ago. We mentioned that it was breaking back here, the 300, and now it's completely obliviated the 300. It's already in the mid, so this is definitely a stock that's getting squeezed. If we look at the weekly, right, the stock is completely in the air, and so it's getting squeezed pretty hard. I actually had a play, and I do different plays, and everybody's different in their trading. So I actually was selling puts here on Thursday as this thing was flushing down. I saw a solid, if I look here, I saw a solid play at 325. So the way puts work, when you're selling puts, I came down here and I started to sell puts somewhere in here, and then we actually broke that level and got down to 321, I think it was. And then so I was actually down on my puts. What's interesting about this pattern and why I had more confidence just trading the stock on Friday is you can kind of see this sort of floor that we built, right? It's like a floor right here at this level at 323, and you can see we sort of built this top ceiling at 325. And so we kind of built like almost like a floor, right? Like a solid floor, meaning that once we broke through this level and did either a VWAP test or whatever, it seems like this level was really going to stick now as previous resistance as support. And so I ultimately got out of my puts. I was, net positive, but it wasn't a great trade just because, I had missed the real flush here. Now, granted, the stock closed at 345 Friday, which means when you sell a put with a Friday expiration, you get to keep that entire premium. So when I sold it on Thursday, I think it was like $5, which is essentially $500 a contract. Now that it expired on Friday, you get to essentially keep it as long as it closed above that price, which it did. But typically I'm a day trader. Like I mentioned, I trade flat, and so I didn't let it expire, and so I kind of got out around this trade. But if you look going to Friday, I knew that this was going to act like a solid support to buy off of. And so let's just keep this floor right here in mind, this 326. Okay, so if you look right here, the low of Friday was what, right? 326. You see that right there? And so we can come here, right? And so we had this right off the open, right? There's your opportunity, the low right there, right? 326. So you see how that works, right? So you break through the resistance, now that's your support, and just continue on, right? And so it got right up here to this top. If we continue to what I would say is sort of see some doji candles and the momentum starts to shift, I can see this potentially selling back off into closer to the 20-day. I mean, we've just moved up 100 points from earnings, where I think we were closed around like 220. So we're up 100 points in a matter of less than a month. So it's moved a lot. But like I said, it's just been a solid stock. And so it ran back up, top resistance. There's clearly a ceiling in the stock. And so if you're getting long, you'd probably want to get in. If you see a false break, you could just cut it. So just, yeah, great play. Like I said, the puts option is a fun trade just because if you feel confident that a stock's not going to close below that level, you can sell it, make some premium, buy it back if you want to just be flat by the end of the day, just God forbid something happens overnight. The one I got to say I'm a little disappointed on is my coin trade. I am down on these calls. I'm still confident in the trade. I'm just off on the timing. As I mentioned before, we had this upgrade, a lot of upgrades on the stock north of 300, 340. And I identified some of these trend lines that you may ask, well, clearly this is not in the trend line, it's trading below it. but what I see is this sort of resistance, right? So this lower line represents what I see as a resistance that the stock needs to break in order for it to come and make in what would essentially still be considered a lower high. And so this dotted line was my target of where I think this thing wants to push. But clearly what happened was once we had the upgrade, we hit a ceiling and then we started to sell off to fill in this gap. Granted that we fill in the gap on Friday, and so I bought here about 3 days ago. Granted that we filled in the gap, my expectation now is that we do make that run. Okay, so if that doesn't happen and we end up selling off, then this trade is clearly a failure. But if we end up curling around and getting back up here, right, just squeezing right back up here like we have on certain days and getting this trend line, then this is where I can see us getting into, right, is that push into 300. That's my price target. Short term, still confident that we can get into this area, but again, if we end up selling off, then I was completely wrong despite all the positive news. You know, the fact that the RSI were still below 50, and also the fact that we have positive momentum. So this is one to watch. SPY all-time highs. You know, where do you go from here? We closed essentially flat on the SPY at what was that, six? What did we close in at? 695. Again, we've been trading straight up. Definitely time for a correction. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in our politics, and so again, I'm still bearish this year on the SPY, on the stock market. Maybe we trap people for the break of 700 and then sell off. But I would definitely expect some type of retracement from this move, at least back in here into the low sixes. All right, silver, my most interesting play. Probably my favorite stock, I would say, of the month. The last few weeks I've been trading the stock pretty much on a daily basis, both long and the short side. I ended up buying puts, so this push north of 72, I think it was 72.50, kind of midday Friday. I actually bought puts on this stock for, I believe it was right down here, right up here, somewhere in here, 68.50. I think it was somewhere here, yeah, 68.50. Now, why did I buy puts? Clearly, there's a gap here, and so when we opened up, I had to buy north of this, or sell short south of that. We didn't do that. We just kind of used that as support to bounce up. I think that people probably expect a continuation play, so maybe we wake up tomorrow and there's a continuation play, possibly a new high. What I expect is a gap down and either a sell-off or a gap down here where people think this will fill in and they'll open up here around 69.70 and they'll sell it off down to the 20-day. Now, if they sell it off to the 20-day, this might be the trade of the year for me. All right, it'd be an awesome trade, but I doubt that will happen. These puts were, extremely cheap. They're near-term expiration, but this would potentially be the trade of the year for me if this thing opens up and essentially sells off. And again, we're getting really close to this 20-day, which we haven't really tested since we were back in November at 45 bucks. So that's what I expect to see, is some type of flush. Like I said, I would love to see the trap here where it opens up again at 70 and then it just ends up selling off, versus trying to fill in this gap, and for people to expect continuation. But again, I can be completely wrong. It's just an idea. And so again, it's trading. Can't always be right. Nothing exciting about Tilray. I don't really trade the stock. It had some earnings, sold off, nothing there, didn't really squeeze. VST, so these are some of the sympathy plays, the plays that made deals with Meta for nuclear energy. And so, same idea. I was actually shorting the stock pre-market. I don't do a lot of pre-market trading. Same idea. It sold off on the news. Nothing really exciting here. Still has this gap. But, I expect this thing to kind of do what coin did. Maybe it comes back up and then it sells off again. Oklo, I actually like this trade a lot. I do want to show you guys the details of Oklo. So I did trade this one during the hours. Now, this is what's interesting about this trade. So I started shorting here. So we tried to break, couldn't break, squeezed up, try to break again. So I start shorting. And so they know shorts are coming in, waiting for this sort of floor to break, right? So we have this floor. And so I start shorting, and I'm probably like 20 cents in the money, and it's just not selling off. And then all of a sudden, boom, we get squeezed up for the ride, right? And I knew what they were doing, right? So they're trying to get, if there's someone here, there's a buyer still here, we got to let them buy, and then let's just come back in. So this is a typical short type of entry when you see sort of, again, you can see this thing was getting sort of broken down by VWAP all day. So you could literally short, reload, short, reload, short, like it was just a constant short reload play. And here got squeezed out, and then boom, we broke that ceiling. And so I was already still in the stock, and I was able to get all my outs. And then same idea, we made a retracement, not quite to the VWAP, and then we sort of broke really down. So you see how that worked is got squeezed, broke down, and then we even broke down further, right, all the way down here. So we got down, I think it was like what was that, 105. So that was a solid play. Same idea as VST. OPAD, don't really care about the stock. This is one of those low. I believe it's a low float. I can't remember. I don't think. No, it's not a low float. This one is not a low float. Same idea. It didn't quite sell off to where I think that this could be a continuation play, especially seeing this sort of area of interest here at $4. So you can see the way the stock traded is it never even really retested its highs at 272, but it kind of held trend, right? So it still had this buy zone, and it's still consolidated. It didn't completely sell off back to where it started, which was here at $1.50. So again, depending on tomorrow, same idea that we've talked about on the channel, right? A liquidity trap, very low volume day tomorrow, holds the trend in the range, and then boom, the next day we start to run again. Okay, so again, I expect tomorrow low volume, trade within the range, and then bam, slam. Okay, so let's watch that tomorrow. That's why it's still on my watch list. That's what I have for you guys. Like I said, my main watch tomorrow is silver. Let's see how that traps. Let's look at the Tesla rebound. Let's look at MU if there's that ceiling at 345, and if we sell off. And I will be live streaming tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Again, please like, subscribe this video. I just jumped back into it after a 3-year hiatus for you guys, so definitely, like always, I don't sell anything on this channel. Just look at your likes, subscribes, your comments. That's what kind of keeps me motivated. So if you learned something in this video, if you want to share something, if you want me to look at something, feel free to holler and add a comment, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.